The first thing that struck Leo about the house in Idlewood was the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was a profound, almost physical absence of sound. As a sound engineer from the city, his ears were accustomed to a constant symphony of urban chaos. The distant wail of sirens, the hum of a million air conditioners, the muffled bass from a passing car. Here, the silence was so complete, it felt like a pressure against his eardrums. It was perfect. The house, a two-story salt box with faded gray siding, was nestled deep within the towering pines of rural New Hampshire. It had been on the market for years, its isolation a deterrent for most. But for Leo, it was the primary selling point. He was fleeing a life that had become too loud, a chaotic breakup, a demanding job that had burned him out, and the general cacophony of a life lived. Too close to others, he needed to reset, to find a baseline, and Idlewood seemed like the place to do it. He spent the first week in a state of blissful decompression. He set up his studio in the large wood-paneled living room, positioning his monitors and acoustic panels with meticulous care. He ran cables, calibrated microphones, and treated the room until it was an acoustically neutral space, a blank canvas for sound. His project was to create a definitive library of natural sounds, the sonic atlas of New England, starting with the pristine wilderness that surrounded him. His first recording session was at dawn. He took his best shotgun microphone and a portable recorder into the forest, hoping to capture the dawn chorus, the moment the birds greet the new day. He set up his gear, put on his headphones, and waited. The silence was the first thing he heard. Then, slowly, tentatively, the world began to wake up. A lone chickadee chirped, its call crisp and clear in the morning air. A woodpecker started, a rhythmic drumming against a distant oak. The rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush sounded as loud as a footstep. It was magical. He sat for 2 hours, motionless, a smile spreading across his face as he captured the purest audio he had ever recorded. Back in the studio, he loaded the files onto his computer. As he listened back through his high-fidelity headphones, the smile faded. Beneath the bird song, beneath the gentle whisper of the wind through the pines, there was something else. A low, almost imperceptible hum. He isolated the frequency. It was a steady, consistent tone, around 60 hertz, the classic frequency of an electrical hum. But he was miles from the nearest power line, and his own equipment was battery-powered. He checked his cables, his recorder, his microphone. Nothing. No source. He dismissed it as an anomaly, a phantom artifact of the recording process. But the next day, it was there again. And the day after that, the hum was a constant, a ghost in his machine, a flaw in his perfect silence. It became an obsession. He spent days trying to locate its source, wandering the property with his microphone, like a divining rod. But the hum was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was as if the very air of Idlewood was vibrating at a frequency he was never meant to hear. A week later, the second sound appeared. He was recording the sound of a thunderstorm, rolling in from the west. The deep, resonant rumble of distant thunder was a sound designer's dream. He sat on his porch, headphones on, capturing the majestic display. As he listened, he heard it again, the persistent 60 hertz hum. But then, layered within a crack of thunder, he heard something else, a voice. It was faint, distorted by static, but it was unmistakably a human voice, a woman's voice. She said a single word. "Please." Leo ripped the headphones off, his heart hammering in his chest. He scanned the woods around him. Nothing. Just the swaying pines and the darkening sky. He must have imagined it. It had to be auditory pareidolia, his brain creating a pattern from the random noise of the storm. He rewound the recording, his hand trembling slightly. He played it back, cranking the volume. The thunderclap exploded in his ears, and there it was again, clearer this time, nestled in the chaotic frequencies of the lightning strike. Please. It wasn't his imagination. It was on the recording, a disembodied voice captured from thin air. The perfect silence of Idlewood had been broken, and Leo felt a cold dread creep up his spine. The house was not as empty as he thought. The voice on the recording consumed him. Leo spent the next 48 hours glued to his computer, analyzing the snippet of audio. He ran it through every filter and diagnostic tool he had. He cleaned up the static, reduced the noise of the thunder, and amplified the vocal fragment. What emerged was haunting. The voice was that of a young woman, her tone strained with desperation. The single word, please, was followed by a faint, choked sob that he hadn't noticed before. It was a plea for help. Sleep became a stranger. The silence of the house was no longer comforting. It was menacing. It felt like a held breath, a waiting. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside his window sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He started leaving the lights on at night, the familiar hum of the bulbs, a welcome distraction from the oppressive quiet. He had to know more. He abandoned his nature sounds project and turned his sophisticated equipment towards a new subject, the house itself. He placed contact microphones on the walls, floors, and windows, hoping to pick up any subtle vibrations. He set up ambient mics in every room, all feeding back to his central console. His studio transformed from a creative space into a surveillance hub. He was, in effect, performing an autopsy on the silence. For days, he recorded nothing but the mundane sounds of an old house settling. Then, late one night, as he was dozing in his chair, a spike in the audio waveform from the bedroom microphone woke him up. He isolated the track and listened. It was the sound of weeping. It was the same woman. Her cries were soft, filled with a profound and inconsolable sadness. There were no words, just the raw sound of grief. It lasted for nearly a minute before fading back into silence. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He was recording echoes of the past. The house, for some reason, had stored these moments of intense emotion, and his sensitive equipment was somehow able to pick them up. It was impossible. It defied all known laws of physics, but the evidence was right there in his headphones. His city-honed skepticism fought a losing battle against the mounting, terrifying proof. He needed a rational explanation. The next morning, he drove into the nearest town, a sleepy village also named Idlewood, 20 minutes away. He found the town hall, a small brick building with a squeaky door, and a clerk who looked like she'd been there since the town was founded. "I'm looking for information on a property," he said, trying to sound casual. "The old salt box house on Pine Ridge Road." The clerk, a woman named Mildred with a formidable pair of glasses, looked up from her paperwork. "The old gable house? Didn't think anyone had lived there in years. Not since the tragedy." Leo's ears perked up. "Tragedy?" Mildred sighed, a sound heavy with local history. "Oh, it was terrible. About 15 years ago, a young woman lived there, Ilara Gable, sweet girl, a musician, played the cello. The whole town loved her. She vanished without a trace." "Vanished?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Just disappeared," Mildred confirmed, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "One day she was there, the next she wasn't. Her car was still in the driveway, her wallet on the table. They searched the woods for weeks, found nothing. The police figured she ran away, but nobody who knew her believed it." "Not Ilara." Mildred leaned closer. "Her fiancé was the primary suspect for a while, a fellow named Julian Croft. A bit of a hothead, a carpenter from out of town. He claimed she broke up with him, that he hadn't seen her for a week before she was reported missing. But he didn't have a solid alibi. They could never prove anything, though. Eventually, he moved away. Leo felt the pieces clicking into place with a dreadful certainty. A musician, A young woman in distress. A vanishing. Was there anything unusual about the case? He pressed. Mildred thought for a moment. Well, Julian, the fiancé, he mentioned something strange. He told the police that Alara had been complaining about the house, said she heard things, whispers in the walls, music when no one was playing. Everyone thought she was just being artistic, stressed. Leo thanked Mildred, his mind racing. He left the town hall with a name, Ilara Gable, and a chilling confirmation. He wasn't just hearing random sounds. He was hearing her. He was hearing the last moments of Ilara Gable's life, imprinted on the very fabric of the house. And the hum, the constant 60 hertz hum he'd first detected. What was its significance? Was it the sound of an amplifier? A piece of equipment she used? He drove back to the house, the pine trees lining the road seeming to close in around him. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of answers, and he was the only one who could hear them. The knowledge that he was listening to a ghost, or at least a psychic echo of one, changed everything for Leo. Fear gave way to a powerful, all-consuming sense of purpose. He wasn't just a sound engineer anymore. He was an investigator, an archaeologist of sorrow. Ilara Gable's story had been lost to time, dismissed as a cold case, but he could hear the truth. He just had to listen closely enough. He refocused his efforts. The persistent 60 hertz hum was the key. It was the carrier wave for the other sounds. It was always present, a foundational layer of noise upon which the echoes of Ilara's life were imprinted. He began to think of it not as an electrical hum, but as the house's resonant frequency. An old house, full of old wiring, perhaps acting as a crude antenna, capturing and endlessly replaying moments of extreme electrical and emotional energy. His new hypothesis was that a specific combination of atmospheric conditions and electrical activity was required to play back the recordings. The first voice, the please, had come during a thunderstorm. He couldn't create a lightning strike, but he could experiment with electricity. He found the house's ancient fuse box in the damp, stone-walled cellar. It was a relic, with old ceramic fuses and cloth-wrapped wiring. It was a fire hazard, but it was also, he suspected, the heart of the phenomenon. The hum was strongest down here. With his recorder running, he began to experiment. He flipped breakers, creating small power surges. He ran extension cords from different outlets, creating complex electrical loops throughout the house. He was essentially tuning the house, trying to find the right frequency to unlock more of its secrets. For hours, he got nothing, just the pop and crackle of his own interference. Frustrated, he sat down on the dusty cellar steps, head in his hands. He was about to give up for the night when he noticed it. A small metal junction box high on the wall, almost hidden behind a thick water pipe. It looked newer than the rest of the wiring. Curious, he dragged over a wooden crate and climbed up to inspect it. The box was warm to the touch. He unscrewed the cover. Inside was a tangled mess of wires, but one thing stood out, a small black device spliced directly into the main power line coming into the house. It wasn't standard electrical hardware. It looked like some kind of crude, homemade filter or transformer. He had a sudden instinctive thought. He took out his multi-tool and, with a surge of adrenaline, carefully bypassed the device, connecting the main power line directly. The moment the circuit was complete, the lights in the house flickered violently. The 60 hertz hum in his headphones surged, becoming a loud, angry buzz. And then, through the noise, a new sound emerged. It was the sound of a cello. The melody was achingly beautiful, but full of a deep, melancholic longing. It was a piece he didn't recognize, complex and emotional. It filled his headphones, so clear, and presented was as if the cellist was in the cellar with him. This had to be Ilara. He was hearing her play. The music continued for several minutes, a stunning private performance from beyond the grave, and then, abruptly, It was interrupted. Man's voice, sharp and angry. "Turn that thing off!" The cello stopped mid-note. "I told you not to play that piece," the voice snarled. The audio quality was different, clearer, closer, not an echo from the walls, but from a specific source. Ilara's voice, trembling but defiant. "It's my music, Julian. I'll play what I want." Julian. The fiancé. It's about him, isn't it? Julian's voice was laced with venomous jealousy. Everything is always about him, even after he's gone. "It's about loss," Ilara whispered. "Something you wouldn't understand." There was the sound of a scuffle, a chair scraping violently across a wooden floor. A sharp cry of pain from Ilara. "You belong to me," Julian growled. The sound was distorted now, overloaded. "If I can't have you, no one will." Leo listened, his blood running cold. This wasn't just an echo, it was a recording. The small black device in the junction box. It wasn't a filter. It was a bug, a listening device, powered by the house's own electricity that had been broadcasting and recording everything in the house. Julian hadn't just been a jealous fiancé, he had been spying on her. And then came the final, horrifying sound. It was not a voice. It was a percussive, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud, thud. It was the sound of a shovel striking soft earth. It went on for what felt like an eternity. The recording ended. The buzz in his headphones returned to its normal, low-level hum. The cellar was silent again. Leo scrambled down from the crate, his body shaking uncontrollably. He knew what he had heard. He had heard a confession. He had heard a murder, the rhythmic thudding. It was the sound of a grave being dug. Ilara hadn't run away. She had never left the house. She was buried somewhere on the property. He tore out of the cellar and grabbed a flashlight and a shovel from the shed. He didn't know where to start. The woods were vast. But then he remembered the recording. The sound of the digging was clear, but there was another sound beneath it. Something he'd almost missed. A faint, repetitive drip. Drip, drip, drip. He raced back to the cellar, to the fuse box. He stood perfectly still, listening not with his ears, but with his memory of the sound. He walked the perimeter of the stone foundation. And then he heard it. A slow, steady drip of water from a leaky gutter falling onto the soft ground just outside. He burst out the back door and ran to the spot. The ground there, under the eaves on the north side of the house, was slightly sunken, covered in a thick carpet of pine needles and moss. It was softer than the surrounding earth. With frantic energy, he began to dig. The shovel bit into the loamy soil. He dug for what felt like hours, his muscles screaming in protest, sweat stinging his eyes. The rhythmic thud of his own shovel was a terrifying echo of the one from the recording. Just as his hope began to fade, the shovel struck something hard. It wasn't a rock. It was a metallic thud. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the dirt with his bare hands. He uncovered a large metal object. It was a cello case. Old and rusted but intact. With a final desperate heave, he pulled it from the shallow grave. The latches were corroded, but he managed to pry them open. He knew what he would find inside, but the reality of it was still a devastating blow. It wasn't a cello. Curled inside the velvet lining preserved by the cool, damp earth was the skeleton of Ilara Gable. And wrapped around her neck was a broken string from the instrument she had loved so much. Leo stumbled back from the open grave, the flashlight beam dancing crazily across the trees. He was hyperventilating, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the horror of his discovery. The echoes, the whispers, the music. It had all led him here to this forgotten corner of the property, to the final silent chord of Ilara Gable's life. His first instinct was to call the police. He fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. Of course. The isolation he had so desperately craved was now a cage. He forced himself to think. Calling from the town would be the sensible thing to do. But what would he say? "I heard a ghost. Confessed to a 15-year-old murder through the wiring in my house?" They would think he was insane. The recording was his only proof, the bug in the cellar. He carefully closed the cello case, a gesture of respect for the woman whose final moments he had unwillingly witnessed. He had to preserve the evidence. He went back to the cellar and, with a surgeon's precision, disconnected the listening device. It was his Excalibur, the one piece of this insane puzzle that was physically real. He packed a small bag, the device, his recorder with the damning audio file, and a laptop. He would drive to the state police barracks, not the local Idlewood, station. This was too old, too strange for a small-town cop. It needed forensic audio experts. It needed people who wouldn't immediately dismiss his story. As he was about to leave, a thought struck him. Julian Croft, Mildred, the town clerk, had said he moved away. But where? If he was still alive, he needed to be found. He couldn't let him get away with it. He booted up his laptop, connecting to the internet via the house's sluggish satellite link. He started searching. Julian Croft, Carpenter, New Hampshire. The name was common enough. He cross-referenced it with public records, searching for anyone with a past address in or near Idlewood. After an hour of fruitless searching, he changed tactics. He thought about Julian's motive, jealousy. The recording mentioned someone else. It's about him, isn't it? Even after he's gone. Ilara had been in love with someone else, someone who was gone. A musician, perhaps? He searched for Ilara Gable, this time looking for musical connections, collaborators, or teachers from before her death. He found an old local news article about a youth orchestra she had been a part of. The article mentioned her mentor and tutor, a renowned cellist named Alistair Finch. A quick search for Alistair Finch revealed he had died in a car accident just 6 months before Ilara disappeared. The pieces fell into place. Ilara's funereal cello piece wasn't just about loss in general. It was for Alistair. Julian, consumed by a paranoid jealousy, believed she was still in love with a dead man. The connection gave him a new search parameter. He started looking for Julian Croft in relation to Alistair Finch. And then he found it. A single buried comment on a 15-year-old online forum for woodworkers, a user named JC Builds, had posted a query about repairing a cello that had been badly damaged. Another user asked about the instrument, and JC Builds replied, "It's an old Finch. A shame. My fiancé's. She doesn't deserve it." The post was dated 3 weeks before Ilara's disappearance. Leo's fingers flew across the keyboard. He searched for the username JC Builds. It was linked to a professional website for a custom furniture business. Croft and Son Fine Carpentry. Based in a town just over the state line in Vermont, less than 2 hours away. The About Us page had a picture. It was an older man, graying at the temples, but with the same intense, dark eyes Leo imagined from the voice on the recording. Julian Croft. He had him. Just as he was saving the web page, the satellite internet connection died. A moment later, the power in the house cut out, plunging him into absolute darkness and silence. Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He grabbed his flashlight. The silence was different now. It wasn't the humming, waiting silence of before. It was a dead silence. The power wasn't just out. It had been cut. He crept to the window and peered out into the inky blackness. At the end of his long driveway, where it met Pine Ridge Road, a pair of headlights sliced through the night. They turned in, coming towards the house. It couldn't be a coincidence. Julian must have kept tabs on the house. Maybe he had a real estate alert on it, a way to know if anyone ever moved in. The new owner, poking around, asking questions in town, it must have spooked him. And now he was coming back to the scene of the crime to silence the only person who could expose him. Panic seized Leo. The house was a trap. There was nowhere to run. The woods were a black, unfamiliar maze. Julian was a carpenter. He knew tools. He knew how to break things. And people. Leo's mind raced, his sound engineer's brain kicking into overdrive. He couldn't fight him, but maybe he could outsmart him. His eyes darted around the studio at his array of speakers, microphones, and cables. An idea, born of desperation and madness, began to form. He had spent weeks listening to the house. Now it was time to make the house speak for itself. The headlights swept across the front of the house as Julian Croft's truck crunched to a halt on the gravel. A heavy-set man stepped out, the years having added bulk but not softness to his frame. In his hand, he carried a heavy iron tire iron. Leo watched from the upstairs window, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had mere minutes. He worked with a feverish intensity, his studio becoming a labyrinth of wires and speakers. He dragged his largest subwoofers and monitors, placing them throughout the house, in the cellar, in the attic, in the empty bedroom where Ilara's weeping had been the loudest. He connected them all to his main mixing board, which was powered by a portable battery backup he used for field recordings. He queued up his audio files, the plea, the weeping, the argument, the cello, and finally, the terrible rhythmic digging. He took his most powerful shotgun microphone and pointed it out the slightly ajar studio window, aiming it at the front door. He plugged the mic into his console, feeding its signal into his headphones. He could hear everything now. Julian's heavy breathing, the crunch of his boots, the jingle of keys as he tried the locked front door. "Leo? Leo Martin?" Julian called, out, his voice a low growl. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." Leo didn't answer. He waited, his finger hovering over the playback button. A loud bang echoed as Julian shouldered the door. It shuddered but held. Another bang. The wood splintered. Leo took a deep breath. Showtime. He hit play. From the cellar, a low, melancholic cello note began to play, amplified through a 15-inch subwoofer. The sound was deep and resonant, vibrating through the very floorboards of the house. Outside, Julian froze. The cello music was faint but unmistakable. It was the piece Ilara had been writing, her song. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" Julian yelled, his voice tight with confusion and anger. Leo faded in the next track. From the upstairs bedroom, the sound of Ilara weeping filled the air. It wasn't just a sound. It was an atmosphere of pure grief that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Julian took a step back from the door. "Who's in there?" Leo twisted a knob on his console. The argument began. Julian's own voice, young and furious, erupted from a speaker hidden in the hallway. "Turn that thing off," he heard Julian gasp. "It's about him, isn't it?" his recorded voice snarled. From another speaker, Ilara's ghostly reply, "It's about loss, something you wouldn't understand." "No," Julian whispered, stumbling backwards. Off the porch. "No, this can't be." Leo was a conductor of this phantasmal orchestra. He was turning Julian's own crimes against him, using the house as his instrument. He amplified the sounds of the scuffle, the chair scraping, Ilara's cry of pain. The sounds seemed to come from all directions at once, disorienting, inescapable. Julian was panicking now, his head whipping around, trying to find the source of the sounds that had haunted his memory for 15 years. He was no longer a predator. He was prey, hunted by his own past. "If I can't have you," his recorded voice roared from the house, distorted and demonic, "no one will." Leo saved the final most damning sound for last. He cut the voices and played the recording of the shovel, thud, thud, thud. He pushed the volume on the subwoofer to its maximum. The deep, percussive impacts slammed out of the house, each one like a blow to the chest. The sound was raw, brutal, and undeniable. It was the sound of Julian digging his fiancée's grave. Julian screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. He dropped the tire iron and scrambled back to his truck, his face pale and slick with sweat in the moonlight. He clawed at the door, jumped in, and sped away, tires spinning on the gravel, fleeing the house that had held his secret for so long. Leo watched him go, his body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. He sank to the floor, the headphones slipping from his head. The silence that returned was, for the first time, truly peaceful. He had not just found a story, he had finished it. Ilara Gable could finally rest. The state police, armed with Leo's recordings, the listening device, and the location of the grave, apprehended Julian Croft a few hours later. He confessed to everything, babbling about a haunted house and voices in the walls. The Idlewood Echo case, as the media dubbed it, became a national sensation, a perfect, chilling blend of modern technology and old-fashioned ghost story. Leo's recordings were the star witnesses. Audio forensic experts testified that they were genuine, unaltered, and captured at the scene. The bug Julian had planted, meant to control Ilara, had become his undoing, a silent technological witness waiting 15 years to tell its story. Leo Martin never lived in the house on Pine Ridge Road again. He sold it, making sure the new owners knew its full history. He moved back to the city, but it was a different city now, or perhaps he was a different man. The urban chaos no longer felt like noise. It felt like life, the symphony of sirens. Traffic and voices was a constant reminder that stories were everywhere, all the time, layered on top of each other. You just had to know how to listen. He finally completed his project, but it was no longer just about nature. The Sonic Atlas became a collection of sounds that told stories. He recorded the murmur of a confession in a crowded cathedral, the frantic heartbeat of a stock trader on the floor of the exchange, the joyful cry of a family reunited at an airport. His most famous piece, however, was the last one in the collection. It was titled Idlewood, 60 Hertz. It was a simple recording of the low electronic hum from the old house. To most, it sounded like nothing, but to those who knew the story, it was the sound of a secret kept, a memory stored, and a truth, finally, set free. It was the sound of silence and everything it held within.